Right here is where you're going to be seen, though.
Okay.
Can you hear us, Lauren?
Yes, I
Okay.
can.
Can
Yeah.
you talk for a little bit so we can get the audio up in the room?
Okay. This is Lauren Finns. Welcome, everyone. I'm a member of the Moscow League of Women Voters. I'm reading you what my introduction is going to be.
Okay. So now we want to go to your settings
Okay.
here under the Apple. Sorry, we're figuring this out. So,
Yeah, that's fine.
where are settings?
So I can't just do this?
Oh, you have a settings button.
Okay, we've got about 30 seconds or less, and then we'll start. Okay, there we go. All right, welcome, everybody. Um, my name is Lauren Finns, and I'm a member of the Moscow League of Women Voters Board and the Speaker Series Committee. And I please note that we are recording this presentation and it will be available to everyone through the Moscow League of Women Voters website. I'm pleased to introduce to you today Dr. Neil Levy, who is a professor of philosophy at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia, and a senior research fellow at the Uhiro Institute of the University of Oxford in Oxford. Professor Levy works mainly in epistemology, and I had to look up that word. And epistemology explores the nature, origin, and limits of knowledge and different types of knowledge. And he has a special interest in conspiracy theories and beliefs. Professor Levy says that according to polling data, many millions of people accept outrageous conspiracy theories, and so it's tempting to conclude that our fellow citizens have gone bonkers. His words. Today, Professor Levy will address those issues, and the title of his presentation is, quote, Have They Gone Crazy? Political Conspiracy Theories in Our Fellow Citizens. Please note that Professor Levy will leave time at the end of the presentation for questions. If you do have a question, please type it into the chat box and we'll get to as many of your questions as time allows. So, Professor Levy, it's all yours.
Thanks, Lauren, and thanks to all of you for inviting me and for listening to me. Um, I'm just going to share my screen because I have slides. So um, it it comes as news to no one that, at least according to polls, people believe all kinds of odd things. Some of those things are completely bizarre. So the first example, this is a headline from The Guardian reporting polling data. All of this is from large, well-conducted polls, particularly Pew, some others as well, including university-associated polls. So this is during Obama's presidency. I can't remember if it was first or second term. A poll found that 1 in 4 Americans think Obama is probably or definitely the antichrist mentioned in Revelations. Uh, Here's a piece of data. This is an article from The Atlantic, but this has been well replicated. 12 million Americans believe that lizard people run the country. Exactly the same percentage of people report believing that lizard people run the government in the United Kingdom. This is a conspiracy theory associated with David Icke, who's a former footballer, according to which alien reptilians can disguise their appearance and occupy positions of power. It believes that the late Queen was a reptilian. I'm not sure what he thinks about King Charles, but many prime ministers and presidents are also reptilians. These are very bizarre beliefs. Some beliefs are much less bizarre, but equally contrary to the expert consensus. I got into this kind of topic at all, largely out of concern about climate change. Why do so many people around the world, the United States isn't particularly strong example, but it's prevalent in many countries. Why do so many people say that climate change is a hoax or nothing to worry about, contrary to the opinion of the great majority of scientists? So I take it there's nothing bizarre about that, but it's bizarre that people who are not in a position to challenge the science, nevertheless do so. So the quote that Lauren mentioned, that the word bonkers, I actually took that from a pollster who says it seems that our fellow citizens have gone bonkers. He was commenting on QAnon, the conspiracy theory according to which a deep state insider is working with President Trump to bring down pedophiles in senior positions who have infiltrated all ranks of government. My aim is to explain why people believe this sort of thing, and also whether we should take their reports of belief as reliable. The most common explanation in the literature, accepted by many philosophers as well as by most psychologists and political scientists, cites psychological dispositions, inclinations, which are universal in human beings. So this is not a theory which blames conspiracy theories and other bad beliefs, as I call them, on people's lack of intelligence or lack of education or intellectual vices, but universal psychological defects. For example, the confirmation bias might play a role. The confirmation bias is a disposition in thinking whereby one overlooks evidence against a hypothesis that one wants to be true and looks only for evidence that confirms it. Confirmation bias is almost certainly real. I am skeptical, though, that it or any of the other psychological inclinations cited by psychologists can explain these cases. Let me introduce you to my friend, Victor the Vizsla. The Victor the Vizsla is very, very skeptical. And he has developed this following cunning argument. Come on. How can a bias that's relatively subtle explain belief in shape-shifting lizards in occupying positions of power. Now, the thing is, we're evolved animals, and our belief systems have to be sensitive to the way the world is. If your belief systems are not sensitive to the way the world is, you die. Or more likely, your distant ancestors died and you're not here. In a metaphor beloved of philosophers, beliefs are maps. They're representations of the way the world is. And we steer by our maps. You know, if I want to get to Moscow, I have to know, where that is and what plane to take, and that's all belief driven. If I just want to feed myself, I have to know where the supermarket is. I have to know how money works. I have to know how the microwave works, and so forth. If I don't know these things, if I have inaccurate beliefs about these things, I might end up trying to get food from the bank, paying with leaves. I might attempt to cook my food in the fridge or put myself in the microwave. Things go badly for me. Anyone who is subject to psychological defects that would bring them to believe in shape-shifting reptiles against all the evidence doesn't seem likely to survive very long. If you believe that, I would have a bridge to sell you, except those people would already have bought all my bridges. These psychological defects are real, almost certainly. There's a big literature. They're just not strong enough to explain bad beliefs like this. They can explain bad beliefs when the evidence is relatively evenly poised. But there's no evidence in favor of shape-shifting lizards, not really. All right, so that's what Victor the Vizsla says. Victor the Vizsla wants to know, why would people report believing things they don't? And Victor says, I'm just a dog, and I'm a skeptical dog, and I find it really hard to believe, but it would be good to have some real evidence that I'm right. So that's where I'm going to try and help Victor out now. Why would people report believing things they don't? There are two main routes to reporting things you don't believe. I'm only going to talk about these two main ones. I believe there's a third one as well, but I won't talk about it. The first is to express an attitude, and the second is sheer trolling. And there's evidence of both. So expressing an attitude, it's very common in sports. You might say, sorry, I should know what your local team is. Your local football team it probably is strong, but imagine it isn't. You might say they're the best team in the country. And that looks like, the grammar of that sentence reports a belief, but you might really mean, go my team. You might really be expressing an attitude. There is quite a lot of evidence that people report beliefs that they don't hold in order to express attitudes. A lot of that evidence is open to interpretation, but this study, I think, is compelling. You might remember from shortly after Trump's inauguration, at the start of his first term, Sean Spicer, his then press secretary, said that the inauguration event had been the biggest in history. That prompted a bit of a fuss for a while. It clearly wasn't true. It was this incident that led Kelly and Conway to say that Sean Spicer was putting the alternative facts. So taking advantage of this controversy two psychologists, Brian Schaffner and Samantha Lukes, did this little study. They gave these two photos to their participants within days of the incident, hitting the headlines. And they simply asked them, which of these photos has more people? They didn't label them. They didn't mention the context. They just asked, which of these photos has more people? So this is obviously photos of the Washington Mall, I think you say, taken on the day of the first Trump inauguration and the day of the first Obama inauguration. The one on the left, photo A, is Trump. They banked on people recognizing the photos and knowing the context, and guessed that they would report an attitude rather than report their genuine belief. And that's what they saw. A significant minority of people who reported voting for Trump, but not people who reported voting for Clinton, said photo A has more people in it than photo B. Now, I just don't think that's at all plausible that they looked at these photos and said, yes, there are more people in photo A than photo B. I think it's far more plausible that having recognized the photos and knowing the context, they took the opportunity to say, yay Trump, or boo Clinton, or boo liberal media, or whatever it might be. They were expressing an attitude and not reporting a belief. By the way, this study replicates my postdoc and I replicated with an American sample a couple of years ago. So people are still, Trump voters are still reporting that photo A has more people in it than photo B. All this time later, I don't believe that they're really reporting a belief. So that's what's sometimes called expressive responding, as we called it in the title of our paper. Reporting a belief in order to express an attitude, a belief you don't hold. The second route to reporting insincerely is sheer trolling. So by trolling, I mean believing something because you think it's funny, or because it makes people annoyed and you think that's funny. What they sometimes call on social media rage bait. Again, there's evidence of sheer trolling in reporting of beliefs. Another first Trump term controversy, you might remember Trump made some rather ill-judged remarks about bleach and coronavirus. They weren't quite as silly as they were reported as being. They were pretty silly, but they were quite. The polarization machine went to work, and it rapidly became reported that Trump said you should drink bleach to combat coronavirus. Rather than when he really just expressed a thought bubble about we should do something about that, which is very typical of Trump. Nevertheless, it was widely reported that Trump thought you should drink bleach to combat coronavirus. And in the wake of that, the media reported that people were drinking bleach to combat coronavirus. And there were a number of anecdotal reports of people turning up at emergency rooms with burns to the esophagus. Well, anecdotal reports is one thing. What about evidence? The CDC sponsored a small study in which they asked people about their practices with regard to COVID-19. Among other things, they asked them if they were drinking cleaning products, including bleach, to combat coronavirus. And they found that 4% of Americans in this representative sample said, yes, we're drinking bleach and other cleaning products to combat coronavirus. Report is one thing. We've seen people report things that they don't believe. They report believing things they don't believe. Littman and colleagues decided to replicate it. They got a much bigger sample. Bigger sample means more power, and they say in the jargon, to detect effects, but it also means less likelihood of chance findings. A larger sample means a more credible result. And they were successful in replicating it. Not only did they replicate it, they actually got a bigger effect. In their study, 8% of Americans reported drinking bleach and other cleaning products to combat COVID-19. Littman and his colleagues, though, did something clever. They put in what they called checks for problematic respondents. So it's normal in psychology to put in attention checks. Attention checks, just what they sound like. Are you paying attention, or are you just answering at random? You're going as fast as possible. So you might get, I don't know, Disneyland is in Florida. Choose strongly or disagree to prove you're paying attention. And then if you don't choose strongly disagree on that question, your data's thrown out. You don't count for the results, because if you've given evidence, you weren't paying attention. So they had attention checks, but in addition, they had these sincerity tests. They were questions like, have you ever used the internet? Have you ever died from a heart attack? Can you name every US senator ever from memory? Do you know what the word whatlet means? Answering yes to any of these questions they took as evidence of insincerity. Particularly questions like, have you ever died from a heart attack? They made the word whatlet up, by the way. So they thought it was they could be pretty confident that people who reported yes, they knew what the word whatlet meant, where, not being very serious. So putting in these attention checks, these sincerity checks, they reduced the number of people who reported having drunk cleaning products to combat coronavirus down to just 11 people. But then they drilled into the data for those 11 people. 10 of them reported that they had either answered yes to the question by accident, or they had indeed drunk cleaning products, but they'd done so by accident. They'd mistaken it for something else. Only one person remained who passed all the sincerity checks and reported deliberately drinking cleaning products to combat coronavirus. Just one. He reported his weight as 1,700 pounds and his height as 100. 100 what? Just 100. He too was probably a troll. To a first approximation, no one was actually deliberately drinking bleach or other cleaning products to combat coronavirus. They were reporting it, but they weren't doing it. And here's some of our own research. This is on an Australian sample. This is quite a high-powered study, quite large by the standards of these things. We measured support for 7 conspiracy theories in an Australian sample. These are mainly pretty familiar conspiracy theories, like the idea that man-made global warming is a hoax, or that governments are covering up the fact that 5G mobile networks spread coronavirus. These are existing conspiracy theories on which there's already existing data, and we were able to match, that data. Our sample reported believing these things at about the same rate as the Australian population has been found to generally in the literature. In addition to the 7, I'm not going to do all 7, in addition to the 6 pre-existing one, we added a 7th. And that 7th conspiracy theory is not one that's been widely studied. And the reason it hasn't been widely studied is we made it up. The Canadian Armed Forces have been secretly developing an army of genetically engineered, super intelligent giant raccoons to invade nearby countries. We added it. It's a deliberately bizarre and frankly silly conspiracy theory as a check for trolling. We think anyone who says yes to that isn't being serious. Here's what we found. Endorsing that conspiracy theory was a strong predictor of endorsing all the others. So among those who endorsed that, they also endorsed an average of just over 4 of the other 6. Whereas among those who rejected the raccoons conspiracy theory, they endorsed just 1/2 of one of the others. We think that's strong evidence that reporting belief of conspiracy theories is often insincere. Now, we don't say always, certainly not, but often insincere. It can be expressive responding when you look at a photo and say, yes, that's got more people in it, that's expressive responding. But so could be saying global warming is a hoax. That could be expressive responding because it's expressing support for one side of politics. For that matter, you might not believe, say, mask wearing is, so this is meant to be an equal opportunity theory. I don't believe the right are particularly susceptible to this. I don't believe the left are particularly susceptible to this. We could see people saying wearing a mask is the best way to stop transmission of COVID-19, not because they believe it, but because they're expressing support for their side. Or expressing support for a belief, particularly a bizarre one, might be sheer trolling to get a rise out of people. Further evidence, he's become a dachshund here. He's actually a Vizsla. I thought he was a dachshund. Victor, the Vizsla, not the dachshund. Further evidence that they're insincere is people who endorsed raccoons were also likely to endorse 2 contradictory conspiracy theories: that 5G mobile networks are spreading coronavirus and that coronavirus doesn't exist. Half of the people who said raccoons was true endorsed both those conspiracy theories, despite the fact they're contradictory, whereas the people who rejected the raccoons theory, only 2% endorsed both theories. Now, again, I don't doubt there are plenty of genuine bad beliefs out there. Roughly, my strong suspicion is the more bizarre the belief is, the more likely it is to be insincere. But lots of people genuinely believe things that are false, contrary to the scientific consensus, for example, but not bizarre. They nevertheless genuinely believe them. And probably some few people genuinely believe some of the really bizarre stuff. Why do people accept bad beliefs when they accept them? In my view, the explanation is just very, very pedestrian. And I think the fact that it's pedestrian is actually a big point in its favor. People believe the things they do very largely on the basis of testimony from other people they trust, they think are reliable. And they're rational in doing so. Here's what I mean by saying that the fact that this is pedestrian counts in its favor. We know that this is generally true for so many beliefs. Testimony, by the way, is just a philosopher's fancy word for people telling you stuff. It's not necessarily like in a legal context or any formal context. If I tell you I'm sitting in my apartment in Oxford right now, that's testimony as philosophers understand it. And you presumably form that belief. Why? Because I would know, I'm in a position to know, and I've got no motive to lie. So you take me to be reliable in reporting things like that, and you go on to form the belief. Reliance on testimony is absolutely pervasive and completely unavoidable and fully rational. People believe that climate change isn't a threat, it's exaggerated or not happening at all, on the same sort of basis as I believe that climate change is a threat and is largely human caused. Why? Because people I take to be reliable tell me so, and the people who reject it do so because people they take to be reliable tell them so. After all, how would I find out for myself? It's literally impossible. I mean, I could set up a weather station outside, but to get data that would actually tell me about how climate is changing would take years of data, years and years. And then it would only tell me about one spot. And even then, climate change is about changes over decades. I would have to compare it to other data, and that's testimony. And even the tools to do the comparisons, I wouldn't have developed those statistical tools and computer modeling. I wouldn't have developed them. I would have had to take them on testimony. And then I'd have to correlate it all with CO2. And I can't measure global CO2 measures for myself either. I'm going to have to take that on the basis of testimony. It should be obvious that when it comes to technical matters, scientific matters, medical matters, and political matters, historical matters, geographical matters, we are reliant on testimony. I mean, just in your own personal life, how do you know who your parents are? You were there when you were born, but you don't remember it. You've been told. You're reliant on testimony for facts about your own country, your town, your city, your street. Less obviously, even the experts depend on testimony. Science is a heavily collective enterprise. No scientist is able to verify a claim like the climate is changing and it's due to CO2 on their own. They're reliant on teams, and in fact, not just teams, but teams of teams. Climate science consists of people in many, many different disciplines. Science is done on very local questions with a big picture emerging from cooperation and sharing across teams. We are reliant on testimony and we can't avoid it. We're not, though, gullible. We filter testimony by reference to cues which bear on whether it's likely to be true. So is it plausible? if yeah, I gave you the example. If I told you that I'm sitting in my apartment in Oxford, you'll probably believe me. This is pretty plausible, given what you know about me. If I said I'm actually in the International Space Station, you'd be much less likely to believe me. It'd be a weird thing for me to be doing. So you filter testimony for plausibility. You filter testimony for competence. If I tell you something about philosophy, you are much more likely to find it credible than if I tell you something about, what the market's going to do and give you investment advice, because you probably think, what does he know? And you'd be right. Am I competent in the area? And as we recognize, different people have different competences. Obviously, filtering by plausibility and competence is rational, but we also filter testimony by reference to values. And that's also rational. If you think I share your values, you should think I'm less likely to try to deceive you. I'm more likely to give you information that's relevant to you. But also, particularly if it's at all politically charged, you're going to be more confident that I'm attending to the right sorts of things. So if I give you an advice, if I were an economist, which I'm not, and I gave you advice on whether, what my opinion on whether the minimum wage should rise or not, depending on your values, you might think you should pay attention to, say, GDP, or you might think we should pay more attention to how that GDP is distributed. How's it going to affect the worse off people in society? And knowing my values would make it more likely I'm attending to the things that you think matter, and will make a difference to whether you think my testimony is reliable. So if that's right, then people are accepting the beliefs, when they're genuinely beliefs, on a rational basis, because people that they genuinely trust and should trust, who seem reliable to them because they're competent, because they're testifying something that seems plausible to them, and because they share their values, are giving them testimony like that. That's true in politics. Politics is very much a matter of policy, which is, requires specialist knowledge. And if somebody on your side thinks it, you should think that it's more likely to be true because it reflects their values and because they're likely to be informed by people who also, experts, genuinely experts, who also share their values. On the other hand, the evidence for motivated reasoning as an explanation for bad beliefs is surprisingly poor. I don't want to get technical for two reasons. One, because it isn't the place, and two, because my ability to get technical is very limited on this question. But the short summary is that most of the evidence for motivated reasoning just doesn't take people's background beliefs into account. It works by giving them a set of evidence and finding that people respond differently to that evidence based on their political orientation or their values. So, for example, in a famous study on capital punishment, people's responses diverged given the same set of evidence, depending on whether they antecedently supported or rejected capital punishment. But the problem with that is it assumes that people will find the data just as plausible, no matter what their background beliefs, and they shouldn't be finding that. And the models of reasoning, which use Bayes' little formula for belief update, find that they're responding rationally to the data. And I think this is becoming increasingly accepted within psychology. I think there's an emerging consensus that we actually can't tease apart pictures on which belief update, the way people diverge, go in different directions on the same set of evidence. We can't tease apart whether that's explained by motivated reasoning, people wanting to believe something and therefore, making an effort to believe it in the face of the data, or whether it's better explained by Bayesian updating, which is updating on their prior beliefs. Since bad beliefs, when they're genuine, are explained by bad trust, people trusting bad sources, the way to address bad beliefs, I think, isn't by teaching people to reason better. They're reasoning okay as it is. It isn't by trying to address their biases. Biases are real, but they're too subtle to explain what we see in the world. Instead, we need to bring people to trust genuinely reliable sources. That's a social problem. That's not a problem that, epistemologists can address or psychologists can address. It's very largely a problem of making sure that reliable sources are seen to be trustworthy. And too often they haven't been. There's in medical science, there's a sad history of, for example, the interests of women and Black people, and of course, especially Black women, being given too little weight. Unsurprisingly, vaccine skepticism is much higher among Black Americans than among whites. Why? It's correlated with lower trust in the medical establishment. So doing things to raise trust is crucial. But there's obviously also a moral problem among people who will report believing things they don't. They're not taking beliefs, they're not giving them the weight they deserve. This is particularly true of trolls. Addressing the problem of trolls is a separate issue. My guess is part of the reason we see so many trolls is people think it doesn't matter. They think it doesn't matter what they believe because they think governments won't be responsive and institutions won't be responsive anyway. So again, that's a social problem which is best addressed by good governance. So if I'm right, these are, combining philosophy and psychology leads to a point where these things run out and social responses have to take over. All right, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Neil. That was really interesting. I looked in the chat and I don't see any questions written there, but so I'll start out. So we tend to be in information silos and in a sense, social silos. So how do we break through those silos so that people who are getting bombarded with bad information, people who have bad trust, how do we combat that and break through with more reliable information that will get through that silo barrier? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So I see in the philosophical literature, this gets called echo chambers.
Yes.
Um, I know it's a term from elsewhere, but it's used inconsistently in different places. So philosophers distinguish between echo chambers, where you might hear different voices, but you don't trust them unless they're giving the right message. And filter bubbles, where you just don't hear from them. And filter bubbles are relatively easily dealt with, although not by individuals. It's really hard for an individual to deal with a filter bubble. I think social media is a big source of filter bubbles, and we need changes in algorithms. To get that kind of change in algorithms, we've got to put political pressure on the social media companies. Unfortunately, right now, my reading is the political pressure is going the other way. There's no real impetus for them to address this, because I think commercially, the algorithms are driven by attention, and filter bubbles actually work very well to drive attention, drive engagement. In principle, though, that one's solvable. You just give people a broader diet. Echo chambers is a harder one, because the problem of echo chambers is not solved by giving people more information if they don't trust the information in the first place. In fact, it can go the other way. They can become more hardline in their attitudes, given exposure to contrary views. I actually don't think there's any kind of epistemological or, cognitive kind of solution to that. It's again a matter of getting people to trust the right sources. Now, we're not in a position, none of us are in a position to being able to say this source is really reliable. This is a person who really knows what they're talking about when it comes to vaccines or heart disease or CO2 emissions or whatever it might be. We have to use indirect markers, like, are they a member of the academy? Do they have the right degrees? Do they have they published in the area? So I think the way to address that is better education and what the markers of genuine reliability are. This is a vicious, it's a wicked problem, because the education won't take as long as people don't trust the sources. So, you get into this chicken and egg problem where you've got to address trust before you can address trust, getting people to trust the education. I do think face-to-face meeting helps. So I saw a documentary about a Republican congressman, former Republican congressman now, who is now kind of evangelist for climate change, and he goes to local communities, people like him, and tries to convince them that climate change is a problem worth taking seriously. And he's leveraging, I'm someone like you, I share your values, I'm a conservative, I'm a Christian, but this is something we need to pay attention to. It shouldn't be a political issue. But I think it's also interesting how he came to accept climate change, because he was a skeptic, and it was spending time with scientists in Antarctica at a scientific station, which I think played a big role in changing his mind. Not because they could show him the science, they did do that, but because he could sit down and have a beer with them and see that these are not monsters. So I think personal contact's really important.
Yeah, that's a really good recommendation, and yeah, good insight. Let's see, I still don't see any questions. Francis, do you have any questions from the folks that are sitting in the room with you?
We don't have any question. Any questions, people here? No, no? Any? Okay. There's a question, how do you get people to change their trust? Is that who they trust? Who they trust?
I wish I knew. Let me tell you another story. There was a white supremacist who went to a college I can't remember what college it was, a small liberal arts college. It was a very weird thing for a white supremacist to do. This was not just someone who had fallen into the ideology. This was someone who was brought up in it. He was, in fact, I think the editor of the youth newspaper for the major self-declared Nazi group in the United States. And he completely rejected that ideology. He completely rejected it on his own telling. Because he made friends with people. People on the campus who knew his background, but didn't reject him, didn't spend a lot of time arguing with him, but hung out with him socially. And these were people who should have been monsters and evil and intellectually, stunted according to his ideology. But he couldn't hang on to that ideology in the face of this personal contact. Now, that's not a technique that's scalable, because there are many, many people. Most people are not, hateful like Nazis. I think most of those people, again, I'm outing myself as a liberal here, but this is meant to be not meant to be partisan. I think if you share my views, you'll see people who vote for Trump as deeply mistaken. But I think most of them are not hateful people. Some of them are, but then, there are hateful people on all sides. And I do think, stopping hating, recognizing that they're rational agents, for the most part, who are trusting badly, is actually a huge step towards establishing trust, across the aisle. At the moment, when we're saying they've gone bonkers, that's not exactly an invitation to trust. Saying, on the other hand, the more extreme among you are probably trolls, and maybe you don't have an ideology at all. You're just happy to hang around and be a troll and get a rise out of people. And the less extreme among you are trusting badly, and that's not a reflection on your rationality. It's a reflection on your epistemic environment. You're not actually less rational than I am. You're just unluckier. I think, that would lower the temperature and maybe constitute a tentative step towards trust.
Neil, that reminds me of a workshop that we did that was a Braver Angels workshop. I don't know if you know that group. And their philosophy is getting people together to find out what they have in common, as opposed to what their differences are, but then they can talk about their differences and see where people are coming from once they establish that they have things in common. And I think that possibly that's a way to break through and find the trust that you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, the US pioneered this sort of town hall model, which I think can work really, really well.
Mm. Francis, anybody else have questions where you are?
Any questions here? No, but I thought that was an excellent, the way you put that all together. A light bulb went on in my head as far as that, seeing these people as not being malevolent, they're just not misunderstood, but anyhow, the way that you summarized that, I appreciated that.
Yeah, I like the term trusting badly versus gone bonkers. That's a really nice way
Yeah.
to frame it.
Or even malevolent, with
Yeah.
that, since trusting badly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Let me look once
Thank
more in the
you.
chat. No questions there. Francis, any last questions before we sign off?
I don't think so. Nobody does. Thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Yes, so everybody, please join me in thanking Neil. We really appreciate your being with us and sharing your expertise with us. So and it's 8 o'clock, or it was 8 o'clock when this is 9 o'clock now, where Neil is. So he's come to us from England, and so we particularly appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All
Have a
right.
good day.
Neil, nice to meet you.
You too.
And I will end now.